So we're facing every day in the newspaper or in media, you're hearing something about college debt and about student debt and how this is the next bubble after the housing bubble. And it's a very dangerous bubble. And so many kids today who are like young in their 30s or whatever are going to have a very hard time buying a house to live in. They're going to be apartment dwellers forever because of the amount of student debt they came out of college. And so the average student debt, the numbers vary. I read last night 31,000, 34,000, 41,000. It's all over the map. But what is really frightening is that these kids don't understand what debt means, and nobody's helping them understand it. So I thought these statistics, since we're all kind of in the seasoned generation, that Americans over 60, a lot of them owe a lot of money still in student debt. So as long as there is demand, obviously, the cost can go up, and it continues to go up. I was with Elon College the other day, and they were saying, oh yeah, we're going to go from 46,000 to 50,000 a year now, and it's coming this fall. Well, that's a pretty hefty jump. And then I went and read a little bit more, and it was like, I think this is relatively common in a lot of companies, but 40% of payroll is employee benefits. And of course, a lot of that is healthcare. And then because colleges want to be able to offer so many things, they have to have more support staff, which are not revenue generators. So then you add that to the amenities, and I forgot who I was talking to the other day, but they claim that they had the best climbing wall of any university in the country. So, and unfortunately that is oftentimes something that attracts kids to go, is their amenities, like how is their health club? And then the Bennett hypothesis. I think all of you remember Bill Bennett, who was Secretary of Education. And he came up with this theory that the more federal aid that a college gets, the higher the tuition, and the federal aid doesn't necessarily go where it's supposed to go. And that's been proven over and over again, but particularly since 2007, I believe, there was a study done that was published, I think, 2 years later by a professor from George Washington University and from Harvard that did indeed document that that is a case, indeed. And then colleges, they don't have a skin in the game. It is my opinion that, I was talking to someone yesterday that said the University of Missouri, after the episode a year and a half ago where they had these riots on campus, they now mandate that their incoming freshmen take a sensitivity training class. And I'm thinking, why aren't they doing a training class on how to manage your loans and how to understand what taking on a loan really means, that it's not free money and you do have to pay it back. So I really would like to see colleges have a little bit more skin in the game and a little bit more accountability for helping kids understand their debt and stay in college. Because so many kids end up dropping out, especially the first generation students who have no one to look to for a role model to see how you do it and how you stay in school and how you manage your money and how you manage your study hours and getting things done. So to me, that's a major frustration. How can families afford college? Well, was it Fritz? Are you the one that has a 6-month-old grandchild? Yes. Okay. So I said to Fritz that yes, I had some tips for him for his 6-month-old. The idea is that when kids are in school, starting in elementary but really in middle school, that is when it needs to be a serious discussion about the importance of paying attention in class and learning. That learning is a really great thing, that the love of learning. And reading to your child from day one is also so important, because if they can get the idea that reading is still a valuable tool, it improves their grades, it improves their test scores, it improves their level of knowledge. So academics are a big deal. And the number one things colleges look at are curriculum. They want to see a student who has had a strong curriculum in high school. It doesn't matter if they go to a school that doesn't offer a lot of AP classes, advanced placement classes, or does not offer an international baccalaureate program. It's important that they take the most stringent classes they can handle. So if there are a lot of APs and they're really good at it, then if they can handle it, take them. But if the school doesn't offer a lot of them, then they take the strongest subjects they can. And they take, if they love language, maybe they double in the languages that the school offers in high school and use it as one of their electives. So that when they graduate or when they're starting to apply to college at the end of their junior year, they have a really nice transcript and it looks good. Also, it's important for GPA. Colleges are very keen on GPA. And I always say, you know, if you have really good grades, but you have lower test scores, well, you need to try to bring the test scores up. But if you have really high test scores and really bad grades, then colleges are going to look at you as a bad risk because they're going to say, smart kid, but a little bit lazy and immature. So we really stress that. And then we talk about test scores. Bill Fitzsimmons at the Harvard University, as the Dean of Admission, said a long time ago, back in 2004, that it is not a level playing field and those kids who can afford test prep should take it because it will help. And then I say to my kids whose parents come in and say, well, we've paid all this money in test prep and it didn't improve the scores. And I'll look to the student and I said, now, do you treat this kind of like your history class where you cram it the night before you have another class or test? And the student would go, yeah. And I said, well, test prep is only as good as the effort you put into it, just like when you're learning to ride a bike, you practice and you get better, or play golf, you practice. And that's the same thing with testing. So a student who can't afford to have test prep can still improve their test scores if they practice taking the test. Depth, student depth, what does that mean? Well, it's real important that in middle school kids try as many sports as they want to play, get involved in as many activities as they possibly can through the YMCA or through their church or through the middle school if there are clubs, but also have them start to find what they like. Because one of the important things that high schoolers must have are things they like to do. Because otherwise you'll have kids playing video games all day. And the idea is not to let them play video games, but to encourage them to find something they develop a passion for. It could be soccer, it could be the violin, or it could be community service, or it could be almost anything. Chess, checkers, the game Risk. I mean, there's all kinds of things that kids can get involved in that then demonstrates they have a depth in that area. And they do it ongoing, all the way through high school. I've had students who loved to play the piano, but they hated to do community service. And I'd say, well, don't you have a retirement home somewhere nearby? Couldn't you go and play the piano for a couple of hours on Sunday in the afternoon? Because the residents of the facility would love to have a young person there, number one, and number two, having nice background music. So student depth is very important. So the strategy that I use when I'm working with kids is that whether a family comes in and they have saved enough or they make enough that college expense is not an issue. And the idea of paying $70,000 a year does not cause them to flinch. But I tell them, you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, much less 6, 8 months from now or when your student's starting college. So fill out the FAFSA, which is the free application for federal student aid, or the CSS profile, which is the institutional methodology that a lot of private schools require. So the FAFSA is required by everybody. And most of my families are not going to qualify for need-based aid, which is what these two forms are really about. But what I tell families is that you just don't know. Something could happen in the economy, and the stock market you could lose all your money, or there could be a catastrophic illness. And if it's in the let's say that your student is a senior and they get all their acceptance letters and they get their award letters, and they do get some aid, but merit aid, but they don't get the whole tuition or the whole cost of attendance. And if you've lost your job, or you've lost your money, or if you've gotten catastrophically ill and can't work, if you have a FAFSA on file, then you can approach the college and say, my child has already put a deposit in, we're planning, for him to go, but all of a sudden our circumstances have changed. Well, if there's a form on file, they can revisit how to help you, and oftentimes will if the student has already been accepted. So I say, it's just like a safety net. It's like an insurance policy. And it's so easy now because it's linked to the IRS, so that you just hit a button and it populates everything for you on the FAFSA. And then the CSF profile is similar, so it's pretty easy to do. So then I talk to families about the list. And when I help a student create a list, like I did with Jerry's granddaughter, and I say, okay, well, if you love the idea of Sarah Lawrence, let's put it on the list. And I have students who come in and say, I really want to go to Princeton. I really, really want to go to Princeton. And I go, well, Princeton's kind of like a lottery. There's no guarantee for anybody, because every applicant that applies to Princeton is a qualified applicant, just about. And one of the ways colleges get their rankings on the U.S. News and World Report and Newsweek, et cetera, is, and this was according to the former dean of admissions at MIT, that two of the categories is the number of applicants they can get. So colleges spend a ton of money on literature and on brochures. And so after they take the preliminary SAT, the PSAT, their junior year, the colleges get the mailing list of who did really well and even who did okay. And when that happens, mailings go out from all these schools, including Harvard, Princeton, Yale, Dartmouth, et cetera, to kids who may not really be candidates based on their grades and test scores and leaderships and other activities they've done. But because Harvard sends out a letter and say, we really are looking forward to your application, we can't wait. Well, that's one of the categories. So the number of applications they can get students to submit. And then the least number of students they accept is another way they get their rankings. So Stanford is number one, or tied with Harvard, for 5% acceptance rate rather. So it's kind of a little bit of a game. And so I try to say to students, that's great, let's put it on your list. And if you get in and it's $70,000 a year and there's no merit aid, no academic aid offered, well, you may consider taking out a little loan or two, because the name will help you with the network you'll be able to return the debt much quicker. So return on investment is okay for the Ivies. I won't say that about any other schools, Stanford and the Ivies. And I just changed my tune in the last 3 weeks when I was preparing for this talk, because I had always been no debt, absolutely no debt. But now I'm kind of trying to soften that. The balanced list, though, is that if I have a student who has good academics and great test scores and really could be a candidate for a highly selective school, then I will help them create a list of schools that include the schools that they absolutely, Northwestern, the WashUs, the Dukes, et cetera, but also include some schools like University of Richmond or Lafayette or Lehigh or Trinity University in San Antonio or anyway, medium-tiered schools. And then the small liberal arts colleges, which I am a major fan of, which is where Jerry's granddaughter went, where my daughter went. There are a list of small liberal arts colleges that can provide as good or better educations in the Ivies, and also help children really grow up and become amazing adults. Anyway, so the list is balanced with schools that will pay them to come to their school because it helps their stats. And there are a lot of kids today who end up at these schools that are lesser known, but pay them so much money to come that it affords them the ability to go on to grad school, law school, medical school, whatever, without debt. And that's our goal, is that kids really, for a liberal arts degree, do not need to take on any debt, if at all possible, because they really will have to start paying it off as soon as college is out. And then they are going to go to grad school if you have a liberal arts degree. One of Jerry's granddaughter's issues was she wanted English. That was what she wanted to major in. And I thought, well, that's a fine major, but the key is going to be return on investment for having that major. So let's make sure you get enough money. Good communication between students and parents. I also say to students in front of their parents at our first meeting, I would like you to have your parents, when everybody's in a good mood, sit down and have a family discussion about what they think is a reasonable amount of money to spend on you per year for college, so that you have an idea. These kids need to be empowered to know that this is their process and they need to own it, but they also need to know what is available to them from the family. And then they know that if a college cost of attendance is $65,000 or $26,000 in Texas for UT or $24,000 for University of North Texas, cost of attendance, that's drive out, then they know what the gap is, if there's a gap. And then they know how much merit aid they need. So I really want the ownership to be on the student. The parents will pay some, if not all, but they need to buy into it and know that they need to have some skin in the game. So this is over and over and over again, I want to stress this, that it's not where they go to college for undergrad, it's what they do when they get there. They've got to get involved, they've got to be leaders, they've got to get research, they've got to do internships. If they want to go to medical school, it is not about MCAT scores and grades as much as it's about what have you done in college to prepare you for medical school. What kind of research have you done? What kind of internships have you had? What kind of exposure have you had? And in high school, kids who come to me and say, I want to be a doctor, I'll say, well, what's your volunteer track record? Where do you volunteer? And if they say North Dallas Food Bank, I go, this isn't going to help you. You need to be volunteering at the hospital, or you need to be shadowing physicians and seeing what they do so that it shows your interest. It's walking the walk, not just talking it. So the next thing is the possible major. Payscale.com is this great website that has the most amazing statistics, and they most recently published this 1,000-page document on all the return on investment, all the dates of how many years kids graduate, like it takes to graduate from college, and the cost of the amount of debt. So it really is interesting. Obviously, Caltech, MIT are top of the list. Engineering careers are right now at the top of the list. They may not be in 10 years. We don't know. There are going to be jobs out there in 10 years that right now we can't prepare kids for because we don't know what they are. I mean, if you think about the Apple iPhone 10 years ago, or 15 years ago, or for me, the first cell phone I had was built into my car and it weighed about this, it was huge. But you think about the development and how short a time it's taken and the types of engineers that they have to have now to work on them. So it's very important if your student says, but I just love poetry or I just love anthropology. You know in your heart that that's going to be a hard road to hoe, having an anthropology degree right here. And that the student, if they love it though, they're going to do well. And they will go to grad school, but they'll have more choices about their grad school if they do well as an undergrad. If you send a student to college and say, I'll only pay for college if you'll be an engineer, and their love is a liberal arts track, and they do the engineering, the chances are that in 20 years, the student who graduated with an English degree that loved English passionately, they'll be making the same amount of money. So it is important to pay attention to the major, but also return on investment where they go. If a student's going to take an English degree, then by God, they better go to a school that has good merit aid and there's no debt, because they are going to grad school. Well, I tell every student that whether they have enough money to pay, their parents are paying for, and the entitlement issue is obnoxious today in a very big way. But I tell students they must get a job on campus. It doesn't matter if it's just a 10-hour, 15-hour, 20-hour week job, but they must get a job on campus. It could be, if they're pre-med, they could get it in the biology department or in one of the labs, or if they're a French student like my daughter was, then they can be working in the language lab and be a tutor. Or they can be an ambassador on campus or whatever, but they must work. And the reason I tell them that is that, number one, it's skin in the game, but number two, it organizes them in a way that they make better grades. It is proven, studies have shown that kids who work while they're in school will make better grades. And so for my daughter, it was just spending money and gas money. It didn't cover very much, but it did cover that, and that was a good thing. So skin in the game. I had a student the other day come in with her parents who are lovely, but they have made these children so entitled, and they don't understand the cost of anything because they get it handed to them. They drive BMWs. They've just got everything. They go to private school. And I sat and listened to this freshman in high school, because they came to see me about whether she should go to public school or stay in private school or whatever, and she wanted public school. And so I was trying to weigh why she wanted that. And then when we were talking about college, she just said, well, that's a given. I'll go wherever I want to go. And I looked at her and I said, oh, really? And I looked at the mother and she goes, oh, well, you know, we'll, and I said, but wait a minute. No. I said, let me share something about reality. So she didn't hear me, and I'll probably never see her again because I don't think she liked me very much. But anyway, I really hope that the parents heard me, because it's, you know, if we don't start teaching kids when they are 14 and 15 that they have to have some ownership of what they do. In other words, they need to be accountable for their actions. They need to have some control over decisions that are made in the house. Because by the time they're 18, you can't just let them out the door to go to college and expect them to be successful if they've never, ever had to make a decision on their own. So I tell parents, I know it's a real hard thing about curfews and all that, but let's involve them in the process and sit them down and say, okay, you would like to have a midnight curfew and you're in 10th grade. How about if we start with you having an 11 o'clock curfew or 11:30, and then you have some wiggle room that you've already worked out with your wife or husband that the wiggle room is. But so they can then say, oh, I would like 11:30. Well, you've won and they've won. But you have, you know, and then you say, okay, but if you don't keep that, then, you know, it goes back to 11 or 10:30. There are so many colleges out there that would love a student like that, a student who works hard, and even if it's a C. Colleges today can assess students in three main ways, because a lot of schools do not interview. Or if they interview with an alum. So what happens with a BC student is that the teacher recommendations, because that's one of the three things. You know, I counsel the kids on how to pick their recommenders for college. And it's critical that they pick a teacher that knows how they perform in school. Not necessarily the class they made an A in. It could be a C. But because the student sought out the help of the teacher or really demonstrated how much they worked in that class to make that C, then that's a great teacher recommendation. So the other two things are the college essay, which is critical, and then their resume. which is part sometimes on the application, but all my students have separate resumes that they will send as well. So a BC student, there are lots of great schools out there that will take a BC student because they see the potential. And of course not everybody makes, I mean, first of all, there are kids that struggle, and so the strongest support program in the country is at the University of Denver. And so if you have a kid that has any learning issues, or and it could be that the BC student, that's one of the issues that's just never been diagnosed or not addressed or whatever, then that would be a great school for them. So that is one of the things that I work hard to do, is identify schools that will fit, not name, but fit the kid. And so a lot of times that's an education process. Students will say, I don't want to go to a school that I've never heard of. My daughter was one of those. She went to Green Hill and she got into everywhere but Dartmouth that she applied to, and the school that gave her the most academic money was Southwestern University in Georgetown, Texas. And she said, how can I possibly go to Georgetown when I could go to Dickinson or Scripps or Bucknell? And I said, well, you know, you can go to those schools. This is the amount of money I have. And 2 years from now, you're going to have to transfer because I will not let you take loans. She said, but how can I go to Green Hill and wear a sweatshirt or T-shirt that says Southwestern? Nobody's ever heard of Southwestern. It's a lame school. And I go, well, it's a free school. So anyway, she went there, and because she put in the effort and jumped into the community and jumped in and did everything, she is this, and I love to brag about my child, she's amazing. And it was Southwestern that did it for her. And it is a good school, and she's going to do well.